What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I'm going to share my 3 rules of pre-spawn crankbait fishing. Let's get into it. Rule number 1 of pre-spawn crankbait fishing is fish in sight of the spawning areas. Whenever I'm talking about pre-spawn crankbait fishing, first I'm talking about build crankbaits or crankbaits that dive down to depth, not lipless crankbaits. We can cover those in a separate video. In addition, I'm talking about water temperatures between 48 and 58 degrees. When the water temperatures are below 48 degrees, I would consider that wintertime crankbait fishing. And then water temperatures above 58 degrees a lot of times are going to cause those fish to move into the spawning flats, and they won't be on the areas I'm going to talk about in this video. So 48 to 58 degree water, a lot of times that's warming water, though if the water temperature does drop from like 58 down to 54, those fish will still be in a pre-spawn mode. And sometimes that's actually better for crankbait fishing, as we'll talk about here later on. The main thing though when you're trying to figure out the areas to fish these crankbaits in is that you want to be in sight of the spawning pockets, flats, or coves the bass are going to be using when water temperatures hit the high 50s and low 60s. Most of the time I'm going to be targeting some type of structure, whether that is a secondary point, a roadbed that cuts in front of a spawning pocket, a major flat out in front of, again, a big bay, or even sometimes just a deeper part of a flat that's in like 10 to 15 feet of water that's a little bit too deep for the fish to spawn in, but the flat might be a spawning flat where they push up into like 3 or 4 feet of water when those water temperatures warm up. The main thing though is I want to be targeting, again, that maybe 6 to 15 foot range. That's the maximum depth I really focus on with pre-spawn cranking. If you get very clear water, sometimes you can catch them deeper than that. But a lot of times there's better baits to catch them on in those situations. As far as the actual baits I'm throwing for pre-spawn crankbait fishing, I kind of have 2 types. Your deeper diving crankbaits and then your more shallower diving crankbaits. On the deeper diving side, my go-to crankbait is the Strike King 5XD. This bait has caught so many big pre-spawn bass for me over the years, and I throw it mainly 2 colors. I throw this Pro Blue color when the water clarity is above 3 feet of visibility, and then I throw a Chartreuse Powder Blue back when the water temperature or the water clarity is less than 3 feet of visibility. For some reason, I still really like to throw a Chartreuse crankbait, even in stained water visibilities, 2.5 feet of visibility. I don't know why, I just always have a lot of confidence in it. But when you do get those clear water conditions, you need to go to a little bit more translucent bait like this Pro Blue. This 5XD will dig the bottom in 15 feet of water on 12-pound tests on a long cast, and it's perfect for fishing anywhere in that 8 to 15 foot zone. You can still grind this bait with the bill shape in 8 foot of water, no problem, fishing it through rocks, stumps, brush piles, and any place fish might be setting up and kind of staging before they spawn. If I am fishing shallower than that though, let's say the fish are in that like 5 to 8 foot range, I'll actually go to the shallower diving crankbaits. One of those is going to be the Spro Rock Crawler 55. This bait actually dives down to like 10 feet, but I'll just grind it down there in that like 5 to 8 foot range and make sure I'm really making bottom contact. This bait also works really well when those fish are feeding on crawfish specifically, and there's a lot of rock in the area. If I am in a little bit dirtier water though, less rock, maybe more stumps or maybe standing timber, things like that, I'll actually go to this old Strike King custom shop crankbait. It's a flat side crankbait made of balsa wood with a circuit board lip. I'll link a crankbait down in the description. It's almost identical to this that's on the market now. This one's been discontinued, but I've caught some giant fish on this bait. Caught an 8-pounder one spring on this in Arkansas, which is a really big fish here in Arkansas. And it's just a really good bait. And these baits, the Rock Crawler and that flat side crankbait, are better again, shallower water, 5 to 8 feet of depth. And then when I want to fish 8 to 15 feet, I go to that Strike King 5XD. That's kind of my go-to 2 baits. And again, I'm fishing those within sight of those spawning areas, making sure that I'm targeting any sort of structure in that 8 to 15 foot zone, points, humps, flats, and you want to find some type of cover usually, whether that's a roadbed, a rock pile, brush piles, or stumps. The bass like to set up around those types of cover, and you want to hit these crankbaits off of those pieces of cover, and if you hit off enough of those pieces, you're a lot of times going to get some really good bites. Rule number 2 of pre-spawn crankbait fishing is target the loners. A lot of times when anglers think about crankbait fishing, especially these deeper diving crankbaits like the 5XD I talked about, they're thinking about finding these big schools of fish. And I have found schools of fish at times in the pre-spawn, but most of the time I'm not going to specifically look for those schools because they're actually harder to find than you might think. A lot of these fish will actually spread out right before they get up to spawn, and you'll find that they're going to be maybe grouped up in 2 to 3 fish on isolated pieces of cover more often than they are in big groups. A lot of times, again, they're gonna be around brush piles, stumps, rock piles, things like that. And I'm only gonna get at most 2 fish per piece of cover I fish with a crankbait. What you can do though is cover a lot of water with a crankbait. And if you scan around with your side scan and your down scan, you can find a lot of these isolated rock piles, stumps, and brush piles and hit these crankbaits through them. And the one fish that is there a lot of times will react extremely well because other anglers are going to be fishing these same spots with jigs and jerk baits and Alabama rigs. And especially nowadays with forward-facing sonar, fewer guys are throwing crankbaits. I actually wasn't that big of a fan of throwing jerk baits around offshore brush piles even before forward-facing sonar and especially afterwards, just because so many anglers would still fish those brush piles with a jerk bait and with an Alabama rig. Very few anglers though, especially nowadays, fish a crankbait through those same brush piles. And I would run sometimes 40 to 50 brush piles or stump rows, house foundation, things like that, with a crankbait in a day. And there are days when I would get 20 to 30 fish in the boat cranking. Some days it's not as easy and you may only get 5 to 8 bites, but those days a lot of times you'll catch really big fish. I've had some days with this powder blue back 5XD where I've had 5 fish for 27 pounds and I just was running brush piles and I would run the same brush pile sometimes 2 or 3 times and finally get one to commit, and they were big fish. So it is definitely a bigger fish pattern, and especially deeper diving crankbaits, I think they just get a little bit overlooked in that pre-spawn time of the year because so many anglers wait to pick these up until the post-spawn period when those fish group up on offshore points and ledges and stuff. But a deep diving crankbait is a fantastic pre-spawn bait. Same thing kind of goes with these shallower diving crankbaits. A lot of times you're going to find that fish will set up scattered out on the point on isolated rock piles or a rock vein. And there may be 4 or 5 fish on that rock vein, but not enough where you're going to find this massive group. And you can pick off one of those fish at least with a crankbait, and then you just have to cover enough of those areas with a crankbait to eventually put 5 in the boat. With the shallower diving flatside crankbait, one of my favorite types of cover to target is standing timber. If you have any shallower, dirtier water lakes that have standing timber, let's say you have less than a foot of visibility, you can work this flatside crankbait through those trees and kind of get out there in like that, I would say 8 to 10 foot zone where this bait then dives down 4 to 6 feet, and you'll catch those suspended fish. They're suspended in those trees in that 8 to 10 foot of water, but they're sitting like 6 foot down, and you can work that bait through those trees. And again, you're not going to catch a massive group of fish with this bait, but you can run a bunch of trees, a bunch of standing timber, and get some really, really big bites with this. So I would highly recommend trying to target more isolated pieces of cover, running a bunch of them, and looking for those loner fish or those small wolf packs rather than trying to find big groups of fish in the pre-spawn with a crankbait.
Really quick, guys, if you enjoy the content here on Bass Fishing Declassified, you definitely want to check out my new traditional offshore fishing playbook on fishthemoment.com. In this digital guide, I provide step-by-step instructions on how to target fish offshore without the use of live sonar. I have flowcharts on how to structure your time, as well as detailed graphics about how to react based on different weather conditions, where to fish depending on the type of lake you're on, as well as a lot of other important information that allow you to dial in your offshore fishing on lakes without the use of live sonar. This is a great resource you can print out and take on the water to take your offshore bass fishing to the next level. Definitely check it out on fishthemoment.com.
Rule number 3 of pre-spawn crankbait fishing is focus on the fronts. Whenever you have frontal conditions rolling through your area, that's the time to pick up a crankbait. Not just pre-front though, but actually before the front, during the front, and the day after the front are all great times to throw a deep diving crankbait or just these even shallower diving crankbaits in the pre-spawn. A lot of times before front, the fish get extremely active, and you'll find that you can basically throw any bait at them and get them to bite. And a crankbait is just a great tool for covering water. If the fish slap at the bait, they'll still get it in their mouth. And so I'll throw a crankbait as basically my number 1 pre-spawn bait in those conditions, even though a spinner bait and a jig and a bunch of other stuff will work. Then as you actually get into the front, where the front is blowing through, you'll get heavy winds. In those heavy wind conditions, a crankbait's a great tool because you can cover water with it, and even if there's a lot of wind kind of stirring up the water and making the fish maybe have a harder time tracking your bait than normal, a crankbait has a lot of vibration, so those fish should be able to feel that bait, still track it down and eat it. And again, those windy conditions are ideal for catching fish on a crankbait. The thing that's interesting though is post front, the crankbait works extremely well also, but it's normally these deeper diving crankbaits. What will happen is during those pre-front and frontal conditions, the bass will push up shallower. They'll get on the shallower parts of the points, shallower brush piles, stumps, rocky areas, things like that, and you can target them with these shallower diving crankbaits and get a lot of bites. But post front, the air temperatures are going to drop. But a lot of times in the mornings after a front comes through, you're still going to have pretty heavy winds and you may have some sunny skies. The heavy winds and sunny skies are going to congregate those fish around a little bit deeper pieces of cover and structure. So a deeper roadbed in that like 10 to 15 foot range, deeper brush piles, deeper rock piles, deeper stumps. And these are the days when I have my best pre-spawn crankbait days. It's that day after the front, first, let's say 4 hours of the day before the wind completely disappears, you can smash them on a deep diving crankbait in the pre-spawn in the areas I talked about earlier. Now, after that front completely moves through and you get to those like second day after a front or the afternoon after the front where you get bluebird skies, no wind, calm conditions, crankbait is not going to be your best option. A lot of times you might want to go to a jig or a shaky head, things like that. When those conditions are completely dead calm, bluebird skies, that's not the best crankbait conditions. But if you have those frontal conditions coming through, a crankbait can shine extremely well. It also works well when there's warming water. So if the water's warming up pretty quickly day after day, a crankbait can be a great weapon as well in those situations. So stable warming conditions, some windy days, and then those frontal conditions pre, during, and directly after are great times to catch fish on crankbaits in the pre-spawn. Hopefully this video is helpful, guys, and gave you some ideas about how to target fish in the pre-spawn with deep diving crankbaits and shallower diving crankbaits. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a comment down below and also subscribe to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel for more content like this. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll see you on the next one.